And welcome, Mike. Good to have you here today. So let's have a look into human versus machine, which will be the underwriter in the future.
Thank you. So in the photograph, there are the images of two people. They're both white men, very well-dressed men, and they're sitting on the floor in front of a campfire in their beautiful business suits. And when you look behind, you can see they're in a tent in the desert. The gentleman sitting on the left of the photograph is the former British Prime Minister, David Cameron. The gentleman sitting on the right of the photograph is Lex Greensill, the founder and CEO of supply chain finance company Greensill Capital. Now, this particular photograph I described to you, some of you may have seen it. It's very famous, and the reason it's very famous is because shortly after it was taken, this company, Greensill Capital, exploded into insolvency and scandal and even accusations of fraud and so on. And the reason I mention Greensill Capital is because the trade credit industry is involved in this story. Because Lex Greensill managed to persuade a lot of credit insurance companies to write policies for him, aggregating, we are told, into the billions of dollars. And if you look at the problems facing the credit insurance industry today, you know, it hasn't actually been so hard with COVID in 2021. The real hard thing has been partly dealing for the community with those Greensill policies. Now, when underwriters are assessing risk on something like that, what they normally look is what I have on the screen here, financial statements. And these are the last financial statements for Greensill Capital before the insolvency, the last ones that an underwriter could have looked at. And what it shows there is an extremely profitable business with a profit margin of 8.5%, which is amazing for supply chain finance. And it makes you wonder, would the underwriters have been better advised to spend their time, instead of looking at financial statements, surfing the web and looking at the pictures on there? Because the type of picture I just described at the beginning is pregnant with information. It's full of risk information, if only you can extract it. If we go back 1 year, what was the biggest problem that we had in the credit insurance community in 2020? We thought it was going to be COVID, but no, it wasn't. It was probably this company, NMC Health. NMC Health is a UAE company that provides private hospital services. Many credit insurance underwriters wrote limits on them, and they also exploded into scandal and fraud in March 2020 and resulted in a lot of claims. Most underwriters that were caught out by NMC Healthcare, they analysed these numbers here. These were the last financial statements you could see before the problem arose. And again, it shows an incredibly profitable company. The problem is, we now know that all of the numbers up there on that screen are completely fake. They were made up. But it was a staggering story with NMC Health. Had a market capitalization of around $10 billion shortly before it went under. It was listed on the London Stock Exchange. It had a nice rating from Moody's. But you have to wonder, once again, would it have been better if the analysts of Moody's and in credit insurance companies and so on, would it have been better if they spent more time surfing on YouTube instead of looking at these fake numbers? Do you know, the founder of NMC Health is a gentleman called Dr. Shetty. And maybe if you're interested later on, go on YouTube and look for Dr. Shetty's car collection or Dr. Shetty's house. And there are some amazing films, and they're actually quite funny to watch. You can go inside the various cars, and you can see the tour of the house, and you can see the pictures of Dr. Shetty hugging Prime Minister Modi of India and funding Bollywood films, and so on and so on. Could it possibly be that this social media information is actually giving us a more accurate reflection of the risk than the financial statements that we used traditionally? The thing is that these days, directors of companies leave a very, very big data trail. The CEO, the CFO of a company, they leave a data trail. They leave it on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, all over the place. And it has been shown that the private lifestyles of directors is correlated to the culture and the corporate governance of the companies that they run. And in turn, it's quite well established that corporate governance is correlated to default probability. So, coming back to Lex Greensill, you would see that he had this collection for the company of these 4 amazing private jets. Imagine the discussion in the boardroom. You know, most people in supply chain finance, they fly Ryanair. It's a difficult business. How did that board discussion go when they were buying these incredibly expensive planes where the interior fit-out cost more than the plane itself? Corporate governance correlated to default probability. So is environmental social governance correlated to default probability. Where are you going to find out about the environmental social governance of a company? Not in the numbers, probably not in what the company's written down, but you will find it on social media. It's not just the directors, though, that leave a data trail. Also the staff do. These days, don't we all do this when we get a job with a new company? The first thing we do, we go on LinkedIn and we go searching for the logo and we connect ourselves. We want to have the right logo of the company, and we make that connection on LinkedIn. So there's a huge amount of data because of that. Now, if you're assessing the risk of a company, the financial statements you're looking at are likely to be 2 years old. What happened between 2 years ago and today? Perhaps on LinkedIn, if you see a change in the turnover of the staff of that company, it might give you a more up-to-date indication. Glassdoor, my son told me about this. I find this mind-boggling, but apparently young people today, when they go to work for a company, they go on Glassdoor and they write reviews of their management. But again, it's a rich data source which is correlated somehow to the default probability of the company. The companies themselves are all very active on LinkedIn, on Twitter. Their annual reports contain certain words. A machine can read those words these days to try to assess the sentiment in the statements. But it can also assess those words for the use of particular terms and phrases, which are also at particular times correlated to default probability. Now, all of this wonderful information that's available to us means that most information now is in the social media field, and then the data that we use on the financial statements is only a small part of it. To get across that much data, clearly technology is the only way to do it. And the technology offers also something quite interesting for us. I don't know if any of you have read any of the books of the Israeli psychologist Daniel Kahneman. So this is his latest book. It's called Noise. His previous one was called Thinking, Fast and Slow. And I'm just reading there in the book Noise about the study they did in an insurance company where they found, and it absolutely horrified me, that the underwriters were losing the company tens of millions by bias and noise and discrepancies in their underwriting decisions. Now, when I read Daniel Kahneman's books, sometimes I want to kind of rip the top of my head off and throw my brain into the waste paper bin, because we're all of our brains, we have these terrible, terrible evolutionary and cognitive flaws in our brains which we absolutely cannot escape. And this is an issue in the credit insurance industry, and you illustrate it with Greensill, because the Greensill scandal started to unfold when a credit insurance underwriter in a company in Australia was suspended in August 2020, apparently for making risk judgments which were outside the laid down authorities. And if you think about the skills that somebody like Lex Greensill has, why is David Cameron there? Why is the plane there? Some of these people are magicians and exploiting the flaws in underwriters' brains. The glamour of David Cameron, the glamour of the plane ride, perhaps it takes our judgment away from looking at the cold, hard facts. So we have the prospect of doing it a different way and overcoming the human biases when we're looking at this new data and using machines. So when you start looking at such data, now you might think, well, people with strange yellow hair, I immediately spot the correlation here with the outcome of the politics. But you need to be careful, because you have to keep in mind that I personally am extremely politically biased, and my judgment on this topic in no way can match a computer. And this is one of the challenges we have when looking at this data, that we don't also how do we interpret it correctly? Another interesting scandal from recent years which fascinates me is Wirecard, which is a German company that went under, and Theranos, which is an American company which also went under. So Theranos was the company that was supposed to be able to test the blood from a tiny pinprick from your finger. And this lady, Elizabeth Holmes, she set up this company, brought a load of politicians on her board, raised tens of millions of capital, and the whole thing was a scam. And there's a court case going on at the moment. But the interesting thing there as well is that both Marcus Brown and Elizabeth Holmes dress the same way. They wear this turtleneck thing. And when you start looking at other data sources like social media, you're going to see that. But how can we, with a human brain, is this turtleneck correlated to what happened to those companies? I don't know. They were copying Steve Jobs, I'm sure. Is it correlated? I don't know. It's really hard for the human brain, with its bias and limited ability to process data, to work it out. So when we're talking about machines, we have some advantages. First of all, the machine is cold and calculating, it never lies. The machine is not impressed by the fancy plane. The machine doesn't find the association of David Cameron with a company as attractive. It's not distracted from the hard data. But on top of that, the machine, the artificial intelligence, can find correlations over these enormous data sets, correlations which the human brain cannot see and maybe cannot even understand. But it can find those correlations and match them to default probability, which is a really enticing prospect. It won't be easy, though. This picture is reminding me, you've probably seen the Tesla car that crashes straight into the tree when it's driving automatically. And you think, how could that happen? Because you could put literally a 3-year-old child behind the wheel and they would have seen the tree and they wouldn't have driven into it. How can Tesla, after all the billions that they've spent on their systems, have a car that doesn't see the tree? But that's what happens. And it shows how difficult it is. My colleagues here in SCHUMANN point out to me just how challenging it will be to achieve the things that I'm describing here. It's all very well for me to say, yeah, check this and this. To make it happen really is really difficult, to match the images into categories and to correlate them to default probabilities. And we too, in credit insurance, we will have some car crashes into trees as well. We will have those accidents. Just as a warning of what can go wrong there, do you remember the financial models that banks were using in the financial crisis? And do you remember that the management teams of the banks weren't able to understand fully the financial models, and it had disastrous consequences? And this is a challenge we all have as we're working more with artificial intelligence and the new data. How does the management keep a control of it and keep understanding it to make sure that it's in control? And no doubt there will be mistakes and accidents. But nevertheless, I think most of us would agree that probably Tesla, given time, are going to solve the problem of their cars crashing into trees, and it will become If it already isn't, it will become safer than the human driver. And it's going to be the same here, that surely in the credit insurance industry, eventually with the use of these new data sources and better technology, eventually the machine is going to consistently win and make better decisions than the human underwriters. So it means that we can imagine a future for credit insurance where, through use of greater automation and bigger data sources, that these errors of human judgments will become, to a much greater extent, a thing of the past. As indeed, the image you see in a credit insurance company where you see rows and rows and rows of desks of credit limit underwriters, perhaps that will become a thing of the past too. And there are advantages with that. If you think about the cases I described at the beginning with NMC Healthcare and Greensill, who pays? Who pays for that human error? It's actually the customers of the credit insurers, ultimately, who have to pay for it on a higher premium. So if we can eradicate some of those errors using technology, then everybody benefits. So perhaps we can imagine then a bright future for the credit insurance community, the export credit community, the export credit agencies, where we use this new data as part of our risk assessments. We do it in an automated way with technology. Now, it's always been in our industry that the most successful companies are the ones that had the best access to data. But what we used to mean when we said best access to data was the ones who had the best access to the financial statements. In the future, 20, 30 years into the future, the most successful credit insurance companies will be those ones that have the best access to the data again. But now we will be meaning the best access to all of the data, including the new data, and have the best ability to interpret that data using technology. So thank you.
So thank you very much, Mike, for this visionary speech. And I think that's very important to simply look beyond the borders of pure IT development, etc. So I think that's very useful to keep a visionary view where all could lead to and how to handle with the aspects that, of course, humans have psychological flaws based on the evolution that we all went through, and I think that was a good word. We cannot get rid of that. We could manage that somehow, and machines could help. What would you see maybe as an idea? What would be the next step also for a company like SCHUMANN to move forward in this direction? Is that more the availability of data, to analyze more data sources, for example? Is that something that is needed to push forward?
Yes, I think so. And we have to break it down into small projects, because what I had up there was like infinite. So you need to break it down into very small projects. You need to do research to decide which data is relevant. The vast bulk of that data out there is just noise to us. It's not going to help us at all. So we've got to find the data points which are relevant, and then it's the practicalities of extracting it.
Yeah.
And that in turn, ultimately, in the same way that we have connection to so many existing traditional credit information sources, perhaps that will expand to new data sources. And the practicalities of making that happen is also challenging.
Yeah. So, fantastic things to do. So we will be busy, we will be kept busy, and will be pushed by this visions also into direction to move forward anything that's related to data sources, getting data into the system, to modeling this, and that's also fascinating from my view to keep on going in this direction. So thank you very much, Mike.